So when you see frog jumping in the daylight, it means that there must be a problem that is forcing that frog to be out of its natural habitat, because its natural behavior is that at daylight it is hibernated. So when you see it jumping in the daylight, then something has interfered with its natural habitat. Yeah.
Something is wrong.
Something is very wrong.
And true to your interpretation, when we see numbers jumping on the 14th, something is wrong. And we also want to, before we get into this conversation, listen to what the former chair of the Budget Appropriations Committee said a few days ago. That's the Member of Parliament for Kihara constituency, Ndindi Nyoro. This is what he said. Let's listen into that before we start our conversation, shall we?
We saw the fuel prices going up yesterday drastically. And the explanation that was given by government is not accurate, because blaming the global oil prices is falling short of what the reality is. Because last year, for the last 1 year, the highest fuel prices we have seen were actually in June 17th of 2024. And in this calendar year, the highest prices we have seen were actually in January. But having said that, it is important for us to know that out of what Kenyans pay at the pump in terms of fuel prices, around half of that money is in terms of taxes and levies. Over 80 shillings of what people pay for petrol prices, over 80 shillings goes into taxes and levies. And of what Kenyans pay for other products or fuel other than petrol, over 76 shillings again goes into taxes and levies. In an oil-producing country like Kenya, the only tool a government is left with is altering the levies and taxes. This is where the problem is. The government of Kenya actually added a new levy last year of 7 shillings in the fuel prices. And how the government works is that time when the fuel prices are coming down, actually that's the reason why Kenyans never felt the global deceleration of the oil prices. Because it's around that time that the government introduced a secret 7 shillings in fuel levy. That is partly one of the problems why the fuel prices are going up. But the more unfortunate bit is that this year, the government has taken that 7 shillings, taken to the banks as security, and then they have taken a loan of 175 billion shillings. This money is not reflecting in the government books as a debt. And therefore, it can only pass as an illegal debt. Because whatever is not accounted for as a debt, then any other debt is illegal. There has been a lot of secrecy around securitization, because these questions, we have asked them even in Parliament, even the people in the Treasury don't seem to know. Some of the questions we are asking, how much money is the government actually borrowing? Because even the 175 is from different sources other than the official source. Secondly, what is the interest rate? Third, after 7 years, which is the period at which they are borrowing, how much will the government have paid to these banks? Fourth, is this money sovereign guaranteed? Because it seems to be nowhere in the government books. It actually also never came to Parliament for any ratification. The problem of this is that we now have the government spending money in advance. They have already collected money in advance for the next 7 years. So if Kenyans demand lower fuel prices, and you've already taken loans using the levies and taxes, how are you going to alter the pump fuel prices? Because the only tool you have is taxes and levies, and it is the one that you've already securitized. And this securitization term is another dogma that is being brought around to confuse Kenyans. It is important for the government to be prudent. It is not fair, because we want to be clapped for today, we add fuel prices, we actually go to the banks and take loans using the same levy, which in a bad day is what Kenyans will demand it gets lowered for the fuel prices at the pump to actually be managed. The other thing I want to highlight is that beyond the people in the National Treasury who are clearly engaging in an illegality of borrowing money and hiding that borrowing, even the banks that are lending money using the securitization issue, they need to answer questions to their shareholders. This money you are lending, how is it secured? If the fuel levy in terms of what Kenyans pay is only created through a gazette notice by a memorandum from the cabinet secretary, what if another cabinet secretary gives the one that lowers the levies, which the banks are already holding as security for the loans? And lastly, in the affairs of financial management, you must never favor any of your creditors, because what basically you are doing is to open a floodgate. If you securitize fuel levy, like the one they are doing, the 7 shillings, they're in the process of doing another 5. Then what if now a Chinese lender comes and they want to securitize our VAT? And another one comes, a lender, they want to securitize our payee. What will be left for the government to do, the governments that are in power or that come to power? It is important for Kenyans to know that the explanation that was given in terms of fuel prices is actually not true. The truth is introduction of new levies, but more importantly, the illegal borrowings that are happening around fuel levy. The questions I'm asking, or the voice I am airing, it is just for the love of the country. Because if we do the same on all the other funds, the government is doing the same in terms of sports fund, we do the same in terms of fuel levy, then where is the flexibility for the governments to make decisions on how to expend their money when the government that is currently there is already spending money in advance? What if the other government that was there did the same, securitized the money in terms of all the taxes? Then what will be the role of the government now? Which decisions would they be making when the money is actually not available?
So this is where we are, a long one, but to able to be listened to in its entirety of that statement. But if we look at it, the bottom line is that according to Ndindi Nyoro, he says that what is causing this large jump in the fuel prices that we've seen after the IPA regulation on Monday is not what we would think it would be when we see the conflict that's happening between Israel and Iran, or what we saw previously with the Russia-Ukraine war, when those high prices then were attributed to those conflicts. But that what we are seeing is that there is a securitization of monies within government. It is levies, it is new taxes that is being used to pay for this illegal borrowing. Martin, would you be in agreement?
I would be in agreement and say, okay, I'm not privy to how that has happened in terms of securitization of that money, but that would be a very dangerous trend if that happened, because we have what we call the continuous government. And whatever the government of the day does today, it must be cognizant of the fact that when they are out of power, somebody else will be managing the affairs of the state. And if you securitize a levy, it means that the other government that comes will be collecting levy and paying the debts that you secured using that levy. And I think it would be a very absurd economic management of a country. Having said that, I would want to say that the industry that we run in petroleum is somehow not the way I would think or imagine that a capitalist system of economic affairs like Kenya would be run. For instance, I am of the opinion that in as much as we control the prices and we do all these manner of things, there are gaps within the supply chain. And for instance, you'll notice that the component of taxation within our petroleum prices counts for more than, give or take, it's 70 to 80% of the cost, meaning that about 80 shillings or thereabout of the component of pump price of petroleum today is basically taxes. And one of the component that I feel as an expert within the industry is not very well justified is what we call the VAT. From the face value, VAT means value added tax. I don't think there's any value that we add in petroleum in this country, because we don't have a petroleum industry in Kenya. We have a petroleum logistics industry. Unless you tell me transporting petroleum from Mombasa to using Kenya pipeline to Kisumu, you have added value. And I don't think that is the case. So we trade petroleum the way we have imported it. It has no value added whatsoever. So for me, when we put the VAT component, other than it being just a way of holding capital or holding cash so that probably the government can be using that money, there is no other value that we add in that. And I feel that is lopsided for me. Why? Because the amount of money we hold, or rather the government hold as VAT in the industry, is big. If you look at 16% of a problem, we consume about 400 million liters a month, thereabout, give or take. And you multiply that by 16%, you realize the amount of money that is just being held from the economy, which would go a long way in easing the issues of cash flow within the economy. And for me, that I think is lopsided. In terms of the spike of petroleum that we have seen, there's one piece that would justify a rise, but that should not be taken to be the entire reason. When there's geopolitical tension, and especially in the Middle East, it is understandable that about 12% of global oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, that is next to Iran. And whenever there are issues in Iran and they threaten to constrain the movement of vessels that bring about petroleum, both to Africa and Europe, then we have extended journeys in terms of people trying to avoid that strait. And then that puts strain on supply, global supply, which now spikes the demand. And we saw that when Israel and Iran had a run in the last, I think, a month or so, where prices went up to about 6%. Having said that, I feel that there's a lot to do. Okay, the other component is right now there is an issue. Actually, I'm not sure that we are out of the woods, because if you look at the, I think, southern Yemen, next to Red Sea, there is this group of rebels called the Houthi, who are sinking ships around there. So owners of the freight vessels, they don't want to pass through the Red Sea, and for some reason they will still go to Cape of Good Hope and all that, which is a very long journey, and this might also bring some problems in the coming years, but in the coming months. But I feel that as an industry and as a government, we have a duty to make sure that we anticipate some of these things insofar as, because when you are a consumer economy, it is in your interest to make sure that you plan adequately for it. And petroleum in this country is a national security issue. You realize that today, if something happened and there is no vessel that is able to come to Mombasa, we may not have stocks that may outlast us a month. And this, we are living in increasingly tensioned global systems where one issue can trigger these kind of things. So we have a duty to either invest seriously as a country with what I call strategic reserves, where you have product that can last you and help you hedge against these global tensions and the global spikes, because this is the only way we can take care of the common person in case of whatever happens, because we are taking every shock that comes out there. And this shock is exacerbated by the fact that in our local economy, we are relying on petroleum as the lowest hanging fruit, where we go to anytime. Today, if we need money, for whatever reason, if this country needs money, the first place everybody in treasury and everywhere else were asked is, how is petroleum? Can we have this levy? You realize that just before President Ruto dismantled the cabinet after the uprising of Gen Z last year, just before that, I think the cabinet secretary for transport then, I think, was Mr. Kipchumba Murkomen. Just before he left office, he sneaked in a levy in petroleum that was a bit people were not very much in agreement with, but it stays. It was, I think, 7 or 8 shillings thereabout. Meaning, if that levy was not there today, then the prices we are having would be buying fuel at 80 shillings. So 180 instead of 187 that is currently there. So I think also the number of levies that we put on petroleum have a long way to do with what happens. So the impact, I can talk about the impact of this, and this is what I'm feeling, that right now we are going to have a bit of strain. One, inflation. Last, I think it was at 3.8. I can assure you it's going to go up, because whenever the prices of petroleum go up, this is an industry that carries every other industry. Yes, please.
No, just continue.
Yeah. So when this happens, is that we are going to see an increased activity in terms of pain in the small-scale industries, where we rely on transport or powered diesel engines to either make production or to make sure that they get their products to the market. So this is going to see the prices go up a little. And when this goes up a little, then you can be sure it mops up what we call the purchasing power is going to be reduced to a great extent.
So, Chomba, we talk about the fuel that we consume in the country, and there's a time the government of Kenya and government of Saudi got into an agreement, G2G deal. And I just did a quick research on the same, and you look at how much Saudis are buying the fuel off the pump, and that is equal to $0.62. Now you look at Kenya is 1.428 per liter. You know, so if you look at how much Saudis are selling their fuel off the pump, is actually cheaper than half what would be in Kenya, which begs the question, this G2G deal that we got into, is it helping Kenya in any way?
I have 2 answers to that. One is very positive, the other one is to the negative. The problem I would first say is that the G2G deal is very good. It's very good in that we secured what we call forex stabilization. Because what would have happened is, if today we let off the G2G, it means that every month will require about $500 million mopped up from the economy on monthly basis, and this is what puts strain on the forex, and probably forex would spike to maybe 150 to 160. So if this happened, it would affect every other economic activity that we do, that we use dollars to import goods, and so this would also exacerbate the trade in the country. But having said that, is that also G2G has what we call fixed premiums. And in commercial agreements, everybody hedges their side, okay? And so when this deal was being done, the people who were giving us that fuel, the Saudis and the guys from UAE, hedged. And the deals have what we call fixed premiums. And I think we have premiums of $90 per barrel on petroleum, super petrol, and I think 88 on diesel. So what this means is, if prices go beyond there, we are safe. But also, prices, when they are low, we don't enjoy. Like now, there has been a spell where the prices have been low, but we can't enjoy that because we already have that fixed. So it is what I would call probably necessary evil at some point. It's not something that is very favors us when the prices are down, but it also hedges us from now the extreme, where we have some countries in Africa who have been buying fuel to an equivalent of Kenya shilling 300. Kenya shilling, 240. So we may not get to that level. But then again, we also forfeit. If prices today went to 80 shillings per litre, then we still cannot have that. Yeah.
So do we see the rise in fuel prices as a direct result of the 5 to 6 increase on world crude? Because we did see that, especially after the first attack that we saw between the US and Iran and all of this. We saw 5 to 6% increase on world crude. Do we see this increase now, July 14th, that after the regulation and everything that has been mixed and gathered by IPRA, do we then see that this is as a direct result of that increase? Because 5 to 6% is a big deal when we're talking about the global scale. And what we are being told, the pundits are saying that it's likely to worsen should the conflict worsen.
Yes.
It's a global phenomenon. It happens. It's happening to everybody. So it wouldn't affect Kenya differently. But do we see that it's direct with what's happening in Kenya?
Yeah, what happens, the way we buy fuel in Kenya, because of planning, we use what we call weighted average. And so in most cases, you'll find that the fuel that we be consuming this month in the weighted average of last month, and half of last month, but one last month, and part of this month, half of it. It's about 2 months to 3 months. So that weighted average has us now paying for the spike that happened in the month of June when that conflict was at its peak. What I am expecting is, because of the ceasefire talks around the whole issue, I'm expecting that the prices should ease. And we should see a slight drop, or not very significant, but a slight drop in the next pricing cycle, because right now we are not buying the way we were buying, but the product we are buying today is what we'll be consuming in the months to come. So we expect that the prices will have eased then. But should the tension go, the way we are, and this is the problem of being a consumer economy, it works like a hydraulic. They push, and immediately we are pushed. You see the way you push the brake pedal and the wheel stops is exactly that what happens to our economy. We have no buffer whatsoever. And that's why I am recommending, and I've always been agitating for this, that in Mombasa, we need to have serious storage. I will also qualify the statement I'm saying here, because if you look at our petroleum industry today, over 50% of that industry is in the hands of international companies that are domiciled in other states, other nations. And I'm a student of international relations, and I'll tell you this, if we have political tensions between countries, what you have seen the countries use are trade sanctions. And if a country today woke up and said that any company that is domiciled in our company is not going to trade with Kenya, and that country happens to be a country from whose these companies come from, and they stop their trading in Kenya for one reason or the other, then we are in limbo in terms of petroleum. So these are some of the things that we must, even as we encourage globalization and international trade interconnectivity, what we call the complex interdependency. But then again, we also as a country must look inward and see how do we hedge against international issues that are beyond our control, such that in case of anything, we still can last a month or two as we organize ourselves.
Okay. I'd like to take a break at this point. We'll come back and continue with this. Martin Chomba is the chairman of the Petroleum Outlets Association of Kenya. We're looking at the impact of rising fuel prices on the cost of living, and perhaps we'll go into that later. We still sometimes find it difficult to make the connection then between the two and what exactly it would mean. When you see fuel prices go up, then what are you saying? Even as you go to that break, got to remind you that if you're looking for dialysis, you don't have to...
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Makofi ya the world champion baby. Na hii ni makofi ya Morphix, which absorbs the liquid 3 times faster na haiwezi leak even in 50 different movements. Renewed Morphix, ultimate quality.
I make my Tuesday count by reading the Financial Standard. It helps me make much better and smarter financial decisions.
Setting the standard every day of the week. The Standard, Kenya's bold newspaper.
Whether in the Ministry of Health, whether in the Ministry of Lands, whether with a certain parastatal, so long as you are paid a salary from monies which government collects from the people of Kenya, unapaswa kuwajibika na kuwa kwa ofisi ile masaa inatakikana.
Are for poor mindsets. Let me just say that. TVs having a TV in your living room really truly is for a very poor mindset. Why? Because as a family, if you're seated in your living room, then you're supposed to be having elevated conversations. Nobody's coming to your house to watch TV. Just stay in your home and watch TV. A lot of homes like these ones have TV rooms. But still, that's what I'm saying, it's a mindset thing. It's a poor mindset thing. You will still find them with TVs in the sitting room. Why? In the living room. Why? Okay, you do what you want to do, but it is just a poor mindset.
I'm speaking for all of us and our viewers. I know this is something very controversial and very different, but it's about mindset.
Tulipatana bongo, niko jeni, kozangu bichi nalo pepo wa bahari.
DJ Tatua.
Baby, when take it to the max. Take it to the
so she deserve a princess treatment, oh. You're a queen and more. As I can see, Shani Italiani come fall bongolo.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
And maybe next month they'll, like you said, it's not the fuel that you've bought that you're using today, that you've bought today that you're using today. You're using what you've bought maybe a couple of months before.
Yeah.
So you experience a rise or a spike because it has to be applied from what is currently happening. But then why are we bothered? Because is it not just fuel in the tank? What happens? We say that there's a connection between the cost of living and the cost of fuel. Explain.
100%. The cost of petroleum is the bedrock. It's actually the spine that holds the economy, because there's no sector that I know of that is not connected to petroleum, including what you're doing today. You coming here, you used a vehicle that had to be powered either as petrol as a mode of propulsion or diesel. But either way, you found yourself here using petroleum. The mama mboga that is taking the mboga to the market is using petroleum. It doesn't matter whether it is the border industry, whether it is the aviation industry. Everybody is propelled by petroleum, and that's why anything that happens to the petroleum industry sends shockwave across. You see, when countries like Russia are sanctioned on petroleum, the world economy feels. And most of these world economic giants, they are themselves producers of petroleum. Like today, US is the #1 producer of of petroleum in the world. And when there's an issue like it's happening, you'll feel the shocks also in the US. So how much more a country like Kenya, who we don't have, I've heard people say that, we produce petroleum, but we are far away from it, and even what we would be doing in Turkana would not be sustainable in Kenya, because as it were, we don't have a refinery. So even if we are producing crude, because the other thing that people must know is that we don't excavate, or rather we don't get petroleum in its the usable state. So it has to be taken to refineries. So you'll find that the ones that we do in Turkana, when we were doing those trials, they could not even be used here, because even the cost of taking that to a refinery is very high. Those of us who have been around for some time will remember that we used to have a refinery in Mombasa, but it's defunct. Why? Because it was designed to cut very raw products, and very few, that is petrol, diesel, and IK, what we call illuminating kerosene. Today, the refineries around the world have been built for efficiency. It's like running a vehicle that uses carburetor today, as opposed to the ones that we are using today, EFI and VVTI, VVTIs, whatever. So it's not sustainable. So we have to rely on developed economies insofar as petroleum industry is concerned, and that's why I said our industry will always operate as a hydraulic. So whenever you hear an issue, it doesn't matter what it is. Today it will be Israel and Iran conflict. Tomorrow it will be Iran and another country, or UAE and another country. But Kenya, we will feel it, because we are a consumer economy that has not adequately planned to hedge against that. Because for me, the only way we'll do that is if we can have reserves here in this country, probably in Mombasa, that can help us last about 5-6 months in case of anything that happens. But today, if we last a month with the oil reserves that we have, we'll have stretched our luck too far.
Do we have oil reserves in Kenya?
We don't have oil reserves in Kenya. What we have is storage for the few days that we are using. For instance, in Mombasa we have storages, and Kenya Pipeline has built storages that we call common user facilities, where anybody who brings in petroleum, the companies that participate in the G2G and importation of petroleum, that is where they put their molecules, their products. So they are just depots. They're actually not storage facilities. They're just depots where you are supposed to go and collect your product.
So what stops us from having reserves? Because unlike other countries, you have policies, strategic reserve policies around importation of fuel and oil. What stops us from having that?
I think the people that have previously been manning the industry and the ministry have not been deliberate on it. And it has to come to a point, because for me, as I told you, I equate it to national security. And the national insecurity issues are increasing by day. So any prudent person in charge of the sector today in this country, the petroleum strategic reserves would be first in their mind. And they ought to be spread across this country. Because remember, there's a time in 2022 when there was an issue, and anywhere you went, there was no petroleum. And the issue was very simple, that the prices that we were getting were similar. That in every village, there's this guy who is selling to Probox and Sientas, and those people could not access. Actually, they are the people that we started representing when we started the organization, because that is who we are. When we could not access the petrol, it became logistically impossible for the people who have the big stations in town to actually fuel motorbikes, because I come from a village called Kangaita in Krinyara constituency. And the next pumps that you'll find that are big stations are in a town called Kerugoya. So even my village in Kangaita, there's a place called Gitombe, Kearida, all those places. If there is no one selling petrol, it means all these motorbikes will all go to Kerugoya town. And when they go to Kerugoya town, you cannot fuel 1,000 or 2,000 motorbikes, even if you have the product. And that's why I'm saying today, we need to have a strategic reserve policy so that we have this spread across the country. Whether you're in Kisumu, there's a strategic reserve product depot there, and so that in case of anything, because we cannot rely, we are living in what we call in international relations complex interdependency, where each system is dependent on the other. Every country is dependent on another country, and in case there's a problem in one country, it affects everybody.
But Chomba, is it a question of we don't have thinking heads, or is it a question of there is a lack of will? And just give me a moment to just digest this, because in my layman's way of thinking, this is common sense for any country. We have people who are in that space who travel the world. You see what other countries are doing. I'll give you a case study of India. India is heavily dependent on imports. 85% of India's crude oil is imported, mainly from the Middle East, where we get it from as well, and recently from the US, Russia, and some parts of Africa. Now, India is the third largest oil consumer in the world. So they took their practice from the US, and they also looked at China. So for us to then look at the best governance practice in coming and formulating policies around imports of fuel and oil, it's very, very simple. So for them, it's coming up with a strategic petroleum reserve. So India developed that. And that's why the model around India is what the US is doing, what China is also doing. Build underground rock caverns, get as much as you can, spread it out, like they were saying, in the villages. In India, you have Karnataka, you have Andhra Pradesh, you have all these other parts where they have millions of tons of reserves. That is just phase one. Phase two is now looking at where else can we get to in terms of public-private partnerships. Number three is then looking at how then do you diversify, because if you are an ally to the US or to Russia, and US has a problem with Russia, that's where you're getting your oil from, then where else do you get your oil from because of the geopolitics? Why are we not thinking like that?
I am afraid that a while ago, some of us used not to really speak, because we used to think that people who run the management of countries are very brilliant. Up until you start discussing some of these things, you realize what you are calling common sense sometimes is not very common. Today, if you are importing fuel in Kenya, you have to put something we call the line fee. You have to have at least 1 million liter in that system. So because your fuel will be pushed by somebody else's fuel to reach Nairobi or Kisumu. It's the same concept, very simple. If I were running, or if I were to advise anybody running that, we would come up with a policy, because we are not short of examples like you've just put there. Anybody investing in petroleum industry here ought to build strategic reserve where there's a certain number of liters that you must be having in this country, domiciled in this country in case of anything, so that we are not just running on hand-to-mouth kind of the way we are running the reserve. So in my view, it is high time, because this is what I tell people. We say we are African when we want, and we say our economy is small when we want to justify some things. But when we want other things, we talk of world best practices. When we talk about the things, why is it today in this country where the infrastructure is dilapidated and not that developed, but you'll see somebody driving an S600? But when you talk about maybe healthcare and some other good things, we say, hey, we've not developed to that level. You see, we get what we want and it's justified, but when what is demanded of an economy or making people be what they ought to be, then we have excuses. So for me, petroleum is not something that we can, it's just like having defense. It's equal to defense. Today we spend billions of money in defense budget. We spend a lot of money in other things. We should spend equally a serious budget on petroleum strategic reserves. There cannot be an excuse for that, and there ought to be a serious policy around that.
So why then, I mean, that's understandable, and looking at the need for reserves and all, but of course the question comes in then that why then within a region would you see that fuel is more expensive from one country to the next? I believe in the region, Kenya is one of the most expensive, Rwanda, Uganda, all benefiting from cheaper fuel prices. Why is that?
Because of taxation regime. That's it's direct. In terms of how the prices, what we call the landed cost, we have more the same prices. Though, as I told you earlier, that Kenya we have fixed premiums. So when the prices are low, globally low, we still have our premiums high. But when the prices are also globally very high, we also have relatively average prices. So most of the determining factors in terms of what will be the prices probably in Uganda, Rwanda, and the region, Tanzania and such, is the taxation component and the landing cost, because ours is fixed. Yeah.
So Choma, you look at, I want to push this even further in terms of, we know that Kenya, we just started exploring oil reserves in the country, and early stages, nothing much to talk about. But if you look at the continent as a whole, you look at Nigeria, 1.3 to 1.5 million barrels a day. You go to Libya, 1.2 million barrels a day. You go to Angola, 1.1 million barrels a day. Yet there is no one is processing this fuel to such a point that it's ready for use. It has to go outside, then we import. Countries like Nigeria have to import the fuel back home. Is it then about time that African leaders, through the African Union, finally sat down and saw how best to harness all these resources that we do have, so that we have a solution within the continent? Perhaps that is pushing it so far, or is it about time that we started having these conversations?
Thank you. And allow me, I met a gentleman that if you don't blow your own trumpet, nobody will realize that you have one. I am a PhD student in developmental studies. And among the things that really bothers me is the petroleum industry in Africa is following in the footsteps of other cash crops that we have in Africa. For example, today, anybody who drinks very good tea, they call it English tea. In England, they don't grow even one bush of tea. So the best chocolate is probably in Switzerland, but they don't grow cocoa. It's the same footsteps that we are following in terms of petroleum. And we are headed to a place where we cannot develop our own. There needs to be a critical thinking, and this is where I think people must be called to order. We are a consumer economy, as I said. Every vehicle on this road, over 80% are imported vehicles. We have countries where we import from who are raising policies, Dennis, that in the next probably 20 years or 15 years, they're not going to be producing diesel-propelled engines.
Is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.